Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you to the Congress for accepting our participation. And I will now present our study entitled Subsistence Strategies of Early European Hominids from Level 9D of Sima Elefante. Archaeological sites with lower Pleistocene chronologies in Europe are not very abundant. As you can see on the map, we can divide them Jaramillo chronologies and the ones with post-Jaramillo chronologies. These pre-Jaramillo sites are located mainly in the Mediterranean basin, and they present a landscape typical of the refugee areas considered favorable for the survival of these first hominin groups. The record of this site, these pre-Jaramillo sites, is not very abundant. Mainly, it's composed by lithic industry and faunal remains. And through the taphonomical analysis of these faunal remains, we can determine the capacity of the resources of the capacity of the obtain these meat resources by these groups. La Cima Elefante is a site in La Sierra de Atapuerca. Along its stratigraphy, we can find several levels with anthropic presence. One of the most important is this level 9, where two human remains were recovered with lithic industry associated to faunal remains. And this level has been dated in 1.2, 1.3 million years ago, being the oldest evidence of human since this summer, where in the level 7, other human remains were recovered, and now this is the oldest evidence of human presence in the European area. We also want to highlight the great taxonomic variety on the site and the exceptional preservation, where we recover birth remains in anatomical connection. This study works with materials that came from level 9D. This level has been excavating during 2013 and 2018 campaigns. And during these years, 2 pieces of lithic industry were recovered, indicating the anthropized context. Up to date, 2 studies has been carried out on the faunal record. One is about the bifaunistic assemblage, where the results suggest that the accumulation were produced mainly by the diurnal birth of prey activities. And another one is about the lagomorph assemblage, where the results suggest that this accumulation were produced mainly by the nocturnal birth of prey. And the results of this study were presented here in this Congress last year. Our main objective, or what we want to know, is which is the role of the hominins in this formation of the assemblage inside the cavity. And for that, we make a taxonomic and taphonomic study of the macro mesofaunal remains. For this study, we have analyzed 850 macro mesofaunal remains. In this presentation, we are only going to present the macrofaunal results. For the taxonomic analysis, we use the reference collection and the atlas of anatomy compared at IPES. And for the taphonomical analysis, we use the binocular loop and the electronic microscope, also provided by IPES. The methodology we use include quantitative analysis, the study of the sample integrity, and the fracture patterns analysis. Our taxonomic analysis points us that we have a clear predominance of cervids and bovids remains, but we also identify rhinos and equids and suids, and carnivores as felids, canids, or ursids. In the case of the study of the ages, as you can see in the graphic, we have a clear predominance of adults, but we also identify senile, juvenile, infantile, and immature individuals. When we study the remains with the size weight point of view, we see that we have a clear predominance of all the anatomical segments for large size and medium size animals remains. And on this main study, the issue, when we apply the issue, we see how humerus, radius, and femurs are the most represent elements from very large size. Humerus is the most represent element from large size. Schools are from medium size, and mandibles are the more represent element from small size. When we apply the percentage of MAU, we see more or less the same results. Here again, we have how humerus, radius, and femurs are the more represent elements. for very large size, and humerus are from large size. Schools are for medium size, and in the case of the small size remains, we see how here is the difference, because we have mandibles, humerus, and tibias as the more represent elements. In the sample integrity study, we want to highlight the high level of fragmentation that we have in the assemblage. Most of the remains has less than 50 millimeters. The breakage patterns fracture analysis, we identify that most of our break paths suggest that our remains were fractured during the where the bone was screened, especially on long bones. The diaphyseal cylinder analysis suggests us that we have most of the remains with less than the 25% of the shaft circumferences. And finally, the ratio between epiphyses and diaphyses say to us that we have a clear predominance of diaphyses, especially in the last parameter, these epiphyses and diaphyses. On the taphonomical study, we've been able to identify 4 remains with cut marks. We have a rib from an immature individual with 7 cut marks on the ventral face. And these marks were produced during the visceration activities. We have another rib fragment, in this case from a bovidae adult. We have 2 parallel oblique incisors that on the dorsal face of the rib, and they were produced during the defleshing activities. We identify 8 cut marks on the lateral face of a central thoracic vertebral crest from an immature of bovid, and these marks were produced also during the defleshing activities. And finally, we identify a transverse incision on the caudal face of a fragment of the diaphysis of a humerus of an adult cervid, and these marks were produced during the butchering activities. In the case of the alterations produced by carnivore activities, we identify scores, pits, and punctures, mainly in bovids and cervid remains. But we also identify furrowing and digestion, and we want to highlight the point that we identify large fragments of bone with digested alterations. As far as it was possible, we measured these tooth marks, and we compared it with the bibliography of the predictor bites. And well, in the discussion of our main results, we want to highlight the great taxonomic variety that we have, especially on the cervids and bovids predominance. We have a majority of adult individuals, and on the anatomical representation, there's a predominance of the appendicular skeleton. We also have a high level of fragmentation, especially in with green fractures. This level 9D has shown an anthropic context with the presence of lithic remains associated with faunal remains. And the location of the cut marks suggests that this first group of hominins has a primary early access to the carcasses, while the modifications produced by carnivores suggest that these predators has a primary and secondary access to the carcasses. The ratio between the epiphyses and diaphyses provide us a low value, so that means that we have a high levels of competition. And it has been able to identify the presence of a carnivore capable of digesting large bones. That means that it's possibly a hyena. And well, following the model proposed by Huguet in 2007, and according, for example, our taxonomic studies, we can provide information about the paleoecology. We were in front of open air areas with wood zones and freshwater flows. And well, these landscapes, these conditions are similar to those sites considered refugee areas. On the other hand, the previous studies made on the technology on this lithic industry that's made in Criacetus flint that outcrops near the site has they point that it has the typical characteristics of Mode 1 tradition. And finally, the scenarios that we suggest, our results suggest of competition for the resources where the hominins had the primary access and the carnivores had a primary and secondary access to the carcasses, suggest a scenario similar to those interpreted in Fuente Nueva 3. So our main conclusions, and to finish, we want to say that we have a clear predominance of cervids and bovids. And for large and medium-sized remains animals, we identify a complete presence of anatomical segments. There's a majority of adult individuals, and the anthropic activity suggests that this first group of hominins has a primary early access to the carcasses. On the contrary, the activities on the modifications produced by carnivores suggest that these predators has a primary and secondary access to the carcasses. And due to the differentiate modifications, we can indicate that it has been two different predators. On one hand, we have a hyena, and another one, other possibly a small, medium-sized predator. So with all of this, we want to say that our studies suggest that the early group of hominins that occupied the Sierra Tapuerca in 1.3, 1.1 million years ago had the capacity to control food resources. Thank you very much again to the Congress for the organization and to all of you for your attention. Thank you. And sorry for the problems.